Hello, church family. Happy Friday. I am bringing you a word of encouragement today from the book of Matthew, chapters 5, 6, and 7, also known as the Sermon on the Mount. And we're talking about discipleship this week. We're continuing to talk about that. And I feel like there are a lot of things that Jesus asks us to do that are kind of countercultural, and they go against what, especially as Americans, what we think of as the things that we are striving for. Jesus, his viewpoint is very different. So when we talk about being a disciple, we're a follower of Jesus. Jesus is the Lord. He's the boss. And we're going to do what the boss tells us to do. And Jesus is a very loving boss. And what he asks us to do is not always easy, but it's always what's best for us. So sometimes when I'm talking to kids about Jesus being the boss, they think, well, if I'm just kind to people, that's what Jesus wants me to do in general, so I should be good. And that seems really easy to do. But we're going to look at the Sermon on the Mount. There are a lot of things that Jesus asks us to do that are not necessarily easy. But again, they are what's best because he is a loving boss. He is a loving leader who wants good things for us. So we're going to get into some things in the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to start at the beginning of chapter 5. It says, "Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them." So this is Jesus talking to his disciples about how to live. It says, he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." I feel like so many of those things are different than what the world would say. The world is seeking power. The world is seeking money. The world wants us to stand up for ourselves. And this is talking about being meek and being merciful and being pure in heart and being a peacemaker, and being blessed when you're insulted. And that is so different than what the world would teach us. So that biblical worldview and following what Jesus says is so different than following what the world is telling us to do. And we're going to skip down to verse 38. It says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." This is a verse that I'll sometimes use with kids. When we think of a bully, someone who would, in this verse, slap you on the cheek, sometimes our natural instinct is to fight back or to get revenge on someone who treats us badly. But the Bible is not telling us to do that. It's saying, turn to them the other cheek also. We're not supposed to fight back. We're not supposed to hate that person or treat them badly or talk about them behind their back. We're supposed to turn the other cheek. And it says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, so this is not walking a mile with someone willingly. This is being forced to do that. And then to go the extra mile for that person, that's an even more difficult thing to do. So again, so different than what our culture would tell us to do, or even that natural instinct, that sinful heart in us would tell us to do. Jesus is asking us to behave differently than the world. Verse 43 says, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." And there are so many good teachings. I really encourage you to go back and read all of chapters 5, 6, and 7. So many good teachings about prayer and fasting and having our treasures in heaven and not on this earth. Again, so different than what culture and the world would teach us, but that biblical worldview and following Jesus's words, again, not the easy thing, but what's best for us. That's what we're supposed to do. And then as he wraps it up in chapter 7, verse 21, starting in verse 21, Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.' Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. And after that, it talks about how crowds of people were following Jesus and became disciples at that time. And we know that that changes later on. But Jesus's teachings were amazing, and they were so different than what other people were saying. And as we look, thousands of years later at our American culture, it's so different than what Jesus's words are here. But that's it right there. When we are disciples of Jesus, we're not living the way the world tells us to. We're following Jesus. We're doing what Jesus tells us to do, because he is a loving Lord who wants what's best for us. Not always what's easy, but what's best. And what's best is to build our house on that rock, so that in the end it doesn't fall with a great crash. So I hope you enjoy your weekend. Follow Jesus, read those chapters, and have a great week.